Hey everyone, welcome back to Here in Apologetics. Today I'm joined by Daniel Gilman. He was a former apologist at RZIM. He's been talking about just some reflections from what can we learn from the Ravi scandal and everything that's gone on that I'm sure you're aware of by this point. But Daniel, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Zach? Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to have you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation talking about really hard and deep questions and kind of like looking at the Ravi scandal. And for someone like you that was on the inside, it's going to be really helpful to have your insight here. So to start off, in case people aren't familiar with like who you are, could you talk a little bit about like who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Daniel, and I only was briefly part of RZIM, but it was an experience of a lifetime, and it was such a meaningful thing when I got the call from Abdi Murray to come join the team. Previously, I'd been working as a pastor for young adults in Ottawa, Canada. And I was also working, that was more part-time, and I also was working more full-time at our Capitol building, Parliament Hill, where I was getting to wear a number of hats, working on human rights issues and pro-life stuff. And then in July 2019, I joined RZIM as a full-time apologist.
Mm-hmm. So you're Canadian, of course, not working in like the U.S. Congress and such. But like, what's your story with like how you got connected with RZIM and Ravi Zacharias and the whole ministry?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was born into a really wholesome Christian family, and I loved Jesus from before I can remember. And then in my mid-high school years, I started having these intellectual doubts about my faith. I loved God, but I was wondering, is the God I loved even real? And when I went to my dad and asked him for how to numb those kinds of questions, instead of giving me an intellectual pill to numb my brain and my mind, he encouraged me to lean into those questions. It showed me how Jesus welcomes our doubts and our questions, which is not what I wanted. It was uncomfortable questioning and cross-examining my faith. As I did, I found guys like Ravi and so many others on his team who helped me find an intellectual foundation for my faith. I got to the place where I thought, it's going to take more faith not to be a Christian, not to believe in Jesus, than it would be to believe in him. And so, Ravi just meant the world to me through that. And then years later, I was working as a pastor at a church, and we were doing a midweek church service in the center of the University of Ottawa. About 40% of the people attending were non-Christians. And so after the sermon, I would have a time of Q&A where I have lots of non-Christians texting in their toughest questions on what I preached about or any random topic. And when Abdi Murray and some of the folks at RZIM, or we say RZIM in Canada, RZIM, when they heard about what was going on, they invited me to an intensive evaluative 2-year process to see if I'd be a good fit for RZIM. And that culminated with me joining the team July 2019. And I was part of the team until January 2021.
Yeah, that's great. And kind of sharing your story here. So I think it'd be helpful at this point. I love how you say RZIM, like it's like French almost. But just kind of like to share like kind of like your journey along with like how this Ravi scandal has progressed. I'm sure maybe you want to add a little bit more, but I'm sure if you're listening, like everyone knows that Ravi was caught in serious abuse and probably like rape and all these just terrible things. And it came out after his death. With these reports that kind of like finalized, which had been like rumors in the past. And so what's kind of like your story as the Ravi story has kind of progressed until today? Because you've been very outspoken with like accountability and things, especially recently.
Definitely haven't always been, for sure. So I also want to mention, I think there's going to be a bunch of time for Q&A. So if anyone is watching and wants to submit any questions, please just ask your questions in the comments. No question is off limits, as we like to say at RZIM back in the day. So I first came across the like sexting scandal stuff in 2017 with the rest of the world. I was not part of RZIM at the time. And I saw it on Christianity Today. And I remember I'd been saying to my brother, Josh, not long before that, like so many men that we've respected within Christendom either had passed away or were found to be frauds. And I think if I remember correctly, I think we'd actually mentioned Ravi as like one of like the few elderly statesmen wholesome that we had. And so all of a sudden I see his name shockingly in this headline about sexting. And I was just like, no, like, please say this isn't true. And so I went and I read and I Googled some stuff. I came across his narrative and I thought, oh, good. Like it's okay. Like when I saw the sexting scandal, I thought, oh, like maybe he had sent inappropriate photos. Okay, I thought like, oh, someone sent unsolicited photos to him. Like, you can't fall him for that. I just believed his narrative, and was so happy to find that there was a good explanation for why Ravi was a wholesome person. And so I just, went on from there. And I joined the team 2 years later. And like I don't even, someone was asking for some examples of what kind of things were said about Lori-Ann Thompson or Steve Boffman or whoever. And another colleague and I were saying, we have trouble.
Do you want to clarify who Lori-Ann Thompson and Steve Boffman are, in case people don't know? Yeah.
So of the tons and tons of women that Ravi sexually assaulted and abused, Lori-Ann Thompson was one of the first people to speak publicly, which she did so while he was still alive. And he ended up, so he had a RICO lawsuit filed against her, and just really went after her with every legal device he had to crush her, as well as his PR team to completely discredit her, and drag her name through the mud. And she continued to hold to the truth and hold to what really happened. And it was because of her story being online, in all the vulnerability and pain that was to have it online, that other victims of Ravi's, after his death, actually the day of his funeral, had typed in like Ravi abuse, whatever they typed in, they found her story, realized they weren't alone. And that's how the story ended up coming to light afresh in 2020. So Steve Boffman is also known as the Banjo Atheist. That's what I think his YouTube channel is called. And he is an atheist who has been going after exposing some of the fraudulent lies of Ravi over the years, starting with Ravi's own inflation of his credentials and other such issues. And so he's been a big champion for Lori-Ann Thompson and the spa women as well. So that's all to say that at RZIM, like Lori-Ann Thompson, Steve Boffman, like these are just people who we thought so ill of. We believe that they were people who were profoundly self-promoting, corrupt, no interest in truth. Christianity Today is something that I had really appreciated in the past, but over time, with a little bit of time I was at RZIM, began to think of just really terribly of. Like after Ravi died, they did an obituary, and almost all the obituaries were just fawning over him, and theirs was to highlight some of the claims against him, the allegations. And I just thought, like, the man's died. Like, how can you be so callous? So I really genuinely felt that way until Daniel Gilman, Christianity Today published a piece by Daniel Gilman on September 29th, 2020. And as I read through that piece, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my wife, and I said to her, Alexandra, this might be true. And 2 days later, I was chatting with Carson Whitenauer of RZIM, and he said, Daniel, look through the evidence. There's more than enough evidence to see that this is all true. And from October 1st onward, I began operating under the conviction that Ravi was indeed guilty. Lori-Ann Thompson was not an extortionist who was trying to destroy him, but rather a victim of his, and that she is a courageous and heroic woman for advocating for the truth. That Steve Boffman, although he and I disagree on questions of religion and faith, that he was honestly someone I have a debt of gratitude for bringing to light the truth about Ravi and so many other things.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I appreciate you sharing your story here. And I would encourage everyone, if you are thinking about this and this Ravi report, and it's like, oh, it's just these claims and there's no evidence, and you maybe think like he's in or something, please just read this report. You can find it on like the RZIM website and such. There's just, like, I was reading, I remember when I read it, it was just like I was sitting getting dinner with my friends, and I saw something on Instagram like, oh, this report read out, and I just read it, and I was like, this is crazy. Really messed up stuff. And if we can believe that Jesus rose from the dead because of the eyewitnesses who wrote it in the Gospels, I think we can trust the many more witnesses that kind of shared their stories so courageously with regards to this scandal. So we're going to talk about, feel free to add.
There's a little more we should probably unpack while we're still on the story part, if that's, I think, that's relevant, I think. So I wanted to write to Lori-Ann Thompson and apologize and own my part in the pain that's been caused. I was aware that like I got to write a tribute in the Gospel Coalition Canada. I did a TV interview just after he passed away in May 2020 with a Canadian Christian TV station, 100 Huntley Street. And in both of those, like I just gave such honor and tribute to Ravi, and I spoke about his fierce commitment to godliness and wholesomeness. And I was aware in the fall of 2020 how much those and other tributes like hurt victims of Ravi's who'd seen them. And so I wanted to apologize to Lori-Ann Thompson, own my own role in perpetuating the lies about who Ravi was. And but I felt like if I publicly gave him tribute, I should probably also like publicly retract that. And so it was important to me that she actually hear this from me as I was still an RZIM apologist. I think ex-staff, it can sully the weight of an apology if you're like an ex-employee who's like, oh yeah, bun those guys. But like, I wanted to apologize to her when I was still part of it. But if I publicly praised him, I felt like before I could privately say, hey, I'm sorry, by the way, I should also publicly own my mistake. So Sam Mulberry, Max Baker Heitch, Carson, myself, we'd all tweeted stuff. Try not to blast RZIM as much as be like victim-centered and honoring the women and Lori-Ann Thompson as in our public retractment of our words. And so I spoke publicly, retracting my tribute. I then wrote to Lori-Ann Thompson. And one of the things, she was so quick to be just so gracious to be forgiving and welcoming me to truth. But one of the things that she asked me, she said, Daniel, I'm aware that your work in politics before joining RZIM was specifically on issues of human trafficking and sexual abuse. And if this is something that you were informed on and actually was informing others on and advocating for and passionate about, then it specifically hurts, she said, when you, Daniel, me, is ignoring her narrative. She said, like, how did you not hear me? How did you believe him? How did you ignore the evidence? And yeah, she really challenged me to ask tough questions. And as part of my own trying to understand where I went wrong and how I did not listen to her, how I was not, just how I ignored her and went right into joining RZIM and writing tributes about his godliness and all that. I picked up some really helpful books that I'd commend to anybody that have at least been very helpful to me. One of those is We Too by Mary DeMuth. It looks at the reality of the sexual abuse crisis within churches, within evangelical churches like my own. Another one is Rachel Den Hollander's incredible What Is a Girl Worth? It was partly that I was reading that when the allegations came to light that helped me be able, when they came to light afresh in September 29, 2020, that helped me be able to believe the allegations finally. An amazing book came out October 2020 by Scott McKnight and his daughter Laura Berenger, which is called A Church Called Tov. Tov is the Hebrew word goodness. And then another incredible book is by Dr. Wade Mullen, called Something's Not Right, Decoding the Hidden Tactics of Abuse and Freeing Yourself from It, something like that. Those books have been outrageously helpful in like baptizing my mind, educating me, and helping me be able to begin to be part of the solution. Whereas before, I was perpetuating the problem.
Yeah, that's so great, because I was thinking about this, like even like when you mentioned Steve Bachman's name, I know that you kind of found out about me through the Apologetics March Madness thing that happened last year, and is happening now. And I remember it was towards the end, there was this guy that was tweeting that was like Ravi scam. It was talking about just how like Ravi's this terrible person and like all these things. And I was like, this guy just has it out for Ravi. So I was like, I just blocked him. And I was just done with it because I just assumed that like these things were false. So what do we do about like things like that? Like we brought so much attention to him, not through just like the Apologetics March Madness, but he was like so praised by so many people when his death came. And
2 million people tuned into his funeral, I think the day of or something, or within the first weekend. Like those are outrageous numbers. Yeah, Zach, you're right. I met you through last year's Apologetics March Madness.
Yeah.
On our team posted the link to vote on your Twitter, and they said, "Hey guys, like Ravi is in the the final weeks of his life. Like let's make sure our guy wins." And so all of us apologists were like saying it to our siblings, our parents, like vote for Ravi, and he won. And we were so like, people were like, yes, like this is a fitting end to a race well run. Yeah. That's how I met you. And then I was so honored when you had, I think you said you committed to the first week after Ravi's death that every tweet you did would have the hashtag "Thank you, Ravi."
Yeah.
And I was just like, so like, I don't know who Zach is, but I trust him. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
And then months later, I got to FaceTime with Steve, Max Baker-Heitch, RZIM apologist and prof at Oxford. Introduced us. So we were FaceTiming, and I got to say to him, "Hey, Steve, like," because he apologized. He's like, "I know I'm really harsh online, but I actually believe in you young guys." And like, and I said, "Hey, like, C.S. Lewis said something to the effect of, a friend is someone who sings the song of your heart when you've forgotten it." I was like, "Steve, I never thought I'd say this because I thought you were enemy number one, but like, you've been a friend to us. Christians have called us to truth, to integrity when we were ignoring this stuff. So you're a real friend." And then at one point, I thought, I wonder who I've blocked on Twitter. Like, I haven't blocked anyone in forever. I haven't ever blocked anybody. And I went to I found where it says who you blocked, and like, Steve was one of the only people I'd ever blocked, besides some like really like pornographic, whatever Twitter thing coming out from the ones I'd blocked, but it was like that in Steve. And I was like, oh man. So yeah, I had to unblock Steve and send him a note just saying, "Hey man, thanks for being a real friend." Another example is like Julie Royce is someone, the Royce Report at RZIM. I didn't know of her until I joined the team, and pretty quickly I saw, oh, this is someone who's so committed to defaming the gospel, because she was someone who was like advocating for Lorianne Thompson, Shirley Stewart, another survivor of Ravi's who came forward while he was still alive. And over time, I began to see that Julie is someone who, contrary to what I thought, loves Jesus, loves the gospel, and is ferociously committed to exposing the frauds within the church. And so just today, actually, I texted her saying like, "Hey, like, thank you for your latest article. Really hard to read. I feel like so many people that I've treasured, you're exposing them as actual frauds, and it hurts, but it's healthy." And I mentioned how like it's tough on my faith. It's tough on my relationship to God right now. Like it really is shattering parts of me. And so it was just such a privilege, man, that like here I have Julie Royce, who I have bad-mouthed myself to colleagues at RZIM, ministering to me. And just she was texting me. I wonder, here, I'll grab my phone. I just want to read to you what she was saying, because I never, a year ago, I could never have imagined just Steve or her ministering to my soul. But I'm like, "Hey, I'm feeling shattered in my faith." And she wrote back and said, Romans 3:3-4, "What if some were unfaithful? Will their unfaithfulness nullify God's faithfulness? Not at all. Let God be true and every man a liar." And she just texted like a prayer and more about like, "Hey, the Bible is very honest that there will be wolves. And like none of this is a surprise to God. This all actually affirms what you see in Scripture. Daniel, like, you can keep trusting Jesus."
So I'm curious, you talked about this a little bit here, but like, how do we help people whose faith it could be shattered by the Ravi scandal? Like there's just so many people have heard his sermons or read his books or things like this. How do you recommend like going forward for people who really their faith took a big beating to see one of their spiritual heroes find out actually just to be this terrible person? So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, first I want to be clear. I don't want to be a fraud myself. And there's probably parts of me that are fraudulent, and I welcome Steve Boffman or anybody else or as well as my wife, to my best friends to help me find where I'm a fraud. But in my effort not to be a fraud, I want to be clear that when we talk about how to help others, I'm one of the others. Like I have found it profoundly painful and shattering. For me, the part that rattles me in my own walk with God and faith in Him is I was so convinced of Ravi's narrative. And I so saw Lorianne Thompson, Steve Boffman, Julie Royce as people who were enemies of what was good and wholesome. That experience of finding out that reality is inside out. Like I've been wondering, like, why am I feeling shattered in my faith? Like Ravi was just one of many apologists that meant a lot to me. I hadn't hung all my hope in him. I'm realizing that it's not so much that I feel betrayed by Ravi, but I feel so distrustful of my own capacity to discern
Mm.
to believe, to trust. Like I have so much confidence in Jesus, but I've found that my own discernment is so frail and easily deceived, and that I easily believe what I want to believe. And so having grown up like loving Jesus, it brings me back to some of those doubts from years ago. That's like, okay, I love God, but are all my reasons for believing in him stemming from the fact that I so badly want this to be true, or am I being really compelled by evidence? It's tough. And so I was chatting with Carson. He's also ex-staff from RZIM recently, and just saying, Carson, like, I feel like I'm bleeding in my faith. And one of the things he reminded me of is like Christianity isn't simply a set of doctrines to be believed. It really is about having a personal relationship with God, and where like trust is injured, even if it's not so much my trust in him, but my own capacity to trust is broken. Again, meaningful trust takes time to repair. And so I'm trying to be patient with myself and my own healing. And I encourage others to be patient as well. One of my prayers is just like, God, like, I need you. I need you to hold my faith. I need you to repair my trust. I don't have the strength. None of us have the strength to hold on to God ourselves. So that's one. The second thing for me has been like, I've just been treasuring the letter of Philippians in the New Testament, specifically chapter 2, where it talks about the humility of Jesus. And I just read those words through and just feeling so refreshed that Jesus is not like Ravi. Like Jesus never inflated his credentials. He emptied himself of all his privilege. He emptied himself of all his fame. He didn't have to become an unattractive dude in a remote part of the earth, but he did. And the way that Amy Orr Ewing wrote a remarkable piece that I encourage everyone to see. I think it was posted by Christianity Today. And she talks about Jesus and women and the way that women were so safe with him. And so just being able to relish, to savor all the ways that Jesus is not like Ravi.
Yeah.
That has been really helpful for me. Oh, one more thing. One of the things that's been tough, one of the mottos at RZIM, some call it an unofficial motto, is pretty much official. It was our motto for our teen series reboot. It was no question off limits. And at RZIM, it wasn't real. And I have precious colleagues on who might come across this interview. It's tough to say out loud, but it wasn't real. Like, we were welcome to ask a lot of questions, but we were not able to ask. Like, when I asked some questions of leadership on global staff calls that were, the only purpose was Q&A about the allegations. And people asked questions, a bunch of different questions. I was among those who asked questions that were taking the women's testimony seriously. And I got a call afterward from one of the top bosses saying, Daniel, you need to make a decision. If you want to be a pot stirrer, you don't want people to say Daniel got let go. Like, if you want to be a pot stirrer, you should quit, because people respect you for quitting on conviction. But if you want to ask these kind of questions, you should leave, or you'll find yourself. He repeated himself, like, or you'll find yourself having to say got let go. So, like, threatening that I'd be let go for asking questions confidentially on that's all to say. RZIM did not take kindly to us asking questions about our big man. And Jesus isn't like that. Like, when Thomas, a precious friend, when friends doubt us, it's really painful. When family question us, it can be really painful. I get defensive very easily. I'm working on it. And when Jesus' family, cousin John the Baptist, when Jesus' friend Thomas, when they question and doubt him, Jesus invites them to even closer, to look at the evidence more intimately, to even place their hands in his scars. Like, Jesus is not like Ravi. Jesus is not like RZIM. Truly, no question is off limits with Jesus. And so that stuff that's ministered to my soul, I wonder if it might be helpful to others as well.
And it's great, and I thank you for sharing that. I was talking with Keith Ward, British philosopher, about like the incarnation. He just talks about how beautiful the incarnation is, where we literally are following God in the flesh, and it's just a beautiful thing. And he thinks that if there's aliens, they all had their own incarnations to kind of follow God as well. So that's an interesting rabbit hole for another day. But one of the most common questions is, what do we do with his books now? I remember I was listening to Mike Winger's kind of reaction, and I was just listening to it, but it looked like he picked up his books and threw them away just right as he was streaming his reaction to the event. So what do you think we do with Ravi's books? Because he published a lot, and there's a lot there.
We hear people saying things like, some of my sweet friends are like, "Oh yeah, I kind of always thought Ravi wasn't that good anyway." Sure, maybe for that. I loved Ravi's books. I loved I was for a couple of years I was looking for a good book to give my father-in-law on New Age spirituality, because my father-in-law is immersed in it and not a Christian at all. And the best book I found finally, I thought, why didn't I pick up Ravi's book before? Why Jesus? An extraordinary book. Has Christianity failed you? Incredible. Sense and sensuality. Such a beautiful book about lust and sin, and so I found them profoundly helpful. I was trying to read an enormous amount last year, partly because I felt like I had to catch up to my colleagues who were brilliant at RZIM, and so I was just burning my way through books, and I decided I want to write someday. I want to write like Ravi, and so I started reading a book of Ravi's a week, among other books I was reading too. But I literally if you look at my book list from last year, it's just Ravi until September 29. What do you do with his books? The books themselves have so much goodness. I honestly, I have removed them from my bookshelves. You're not going to see any of them here, because as much as I think they can be helpful, I want survivors of sexual abuse, whether it's survivors who were harmed by Ravi or anybody, to come into any church, walk past any church library, go into any Christian bookstore, or come into my home, and not have to wonder, are they going to see a sexual predator's name emblazoned on these books? As much as it's a loss on the one hand to have to throw away these books with a lot of helpful stuff, more important is for people who've been crushed through sexual abuse to be able to come into a bookstore and find a book for Nancy Guthrie's incredible book on suffering, or whatever, Wade Mullen's book on abuse. I want them to be able to come in and not have to think. So as we think through, people say is that cancel culture and all this kind of stuff? Rachel Den Hollander said to Sam Albury and I, we reached out to her for advice when this was first unfolding. We said, we educate us on how we can be helpful to victims. And she said, guys, this was really important. She said, guys, almost everyone thinks that the most traumatic and soul-crushing, life-changing aspect of abuse is the moment that abuse occurs. She said, that's not true for most survivors. She said, for most survivors of abuse, it's when they disclose to somebody and how they were responded to. That can be the most crucial moment as to if they're going to be able to find healing and wholeness and overcome and restoration, or if this will just crush them in a way that is so hard to recover from. And she said that this RZIM represents Christian worldview to the world and to Christians around the world. And the way that we are responding to his situation, to these women's situation, is telling the world, telling survivors of abuse, how do Christians respond to disclosure? And therefore, I want to be very careful that we're circling the wagons around survivors and not around our faith speakers or authors. And so for that reason, my wife and I thought fit to remove all of his books from our shelves and to throw them. I think I didn't even put them in the recycling, to be honest. I think we threw them in our apartment garbage chute. Yeah.
It's definitely, it's a really tricky situation. But I do think I agree with you completely that there's just so many other great Christian authors out there that there's just no need to keep a sexual predator's books on our shelves when there's just so many godly people out there. Which is a little bit into my next question here that I have for you is, how can we not allow the next Ravi to develop? Because when you read the report, it's kind of just kind of crazy to think about everything that kind of happened where, like his phone and his computer on a different internet server than like everyone else at RZIM, and him just having this like control of ministry funds that was unchecked and anything like that.
Yeah.
So like, what can we do to prevent another Ravi from coming about and these terrible things?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, my colleague Alonzo, he's also my best friend other than my wife. He and I like have each other's thumbs in each other's phones until we got like a phone with a face, and like we have a password now with a face in each other's phones, because we've done a lot of travel and just life together. And we want to be able to just we want the other guy to be able to pick up our phone and just look through like anything. Like I want him to be able to, it's the same password, like the face and the thumb is the same password to my banking. I want the man to know my financials. I want him to know my spending. I want him to know anyone I've texted. I want him to see my browsing history. I want him to know every part of me, because one, I want to be caught on the earliest side possible of toxic decisions, sinful behaviors. I want to be caught when it's like as light as possible, so that it doesn't snowball. And I find that a lot of people, myself included, make the worst decisions when we're lonely. And so I'm trying to cultivate not only like accountability and transparency in my life, practicing confession with a specific person who can, like Alonzo, so he can like know the depth of my shadows and brokenness. So on the one hand, it's kind of the serious, almost sad side of like talking about the heavy stuff. But then also I'm trying to cultivate vibrant friendships. And if you read in some of the reporting on Ravi, you can find quotes where he talks about his excruciating loneliness. None of that mitigates what he's done. But that I am watching to see, okay, what can I do differently to make sure that my own little small sphere, that I am not mirroring his behavior at all. And so, yeah, by cultivating like just precious friendships, making sure that we have friends, not fans. I hear pastors all the time say like pastoral ministry is so lonely. Well, that shows me that we have lost the value of friendship. We don't understand what church was designed to be, a community. Like if any pastor is part of a community, like they're pastoring a church. And if they're lonely when they're like part of this community, then it means that we have approached community, friendship in a way where they are above it, where they are removed from it, and so we need to make sure that like that pastors are like, you know what I'm saying? We all, every one of us needs friends, not fans. A huge book on this. I know you can't solve the world's problems with books, but if you could, a really good book is called Lead by Paul David Tripp. It was one of the huge, like, just helps for me, this pastor, processing how can I cultivate my life differently. Another really, really good book on the topic, not by a Christian, is this one right here by the former CEO of Dunkin' Donuts. It's called The Challenge Culture. And it's about how to cultivate friendships and work relationships where we're inviting people to challenge us, to know us. I found it for $2 at on the side of the street, but you can also get it on Amazon. It's really good.
Yeah, that's great.
Question, Zach, what are your thoughts? I know that like this is all must have made a huge impact on you, as you were like so immersed in the apologetics world. What are your thoughts on how we can avoid becoming or letting another Ravi become?
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about, because I was just thinking about it as you were talking. Like, I don't think that Ravi, when he was preaching the gospel in Vietnam in the 1960s or 70s, I don't think he had this idea, this master plan where he'd become this like sexual predator and he'd think he'd get away with it and everyone would know about it. And I think, at least from my perspective, a lot of it comes back to what you were talking about in terms of like accountability and holiness. Because it seems like, just reading the Ravi report, it seems like he just kind of went unchecked. There was no one who could go through Ravi's phone or see what was going on here and kind of check this power and say, hey, what's going on here? He kind of just was like just in charge, which is like, sometimes it seems like almost in like maybe like your churches or our ministries, like I'm not involved in pastoral ministry at all, but it almost seems like we're running it like a government, not like a church. Like in America, we have like the president who's the head. He's kind of on his own in the sense there. Whereas like in different governments, it may be different, but for here, that's kind of how it works. We've almost modeled our churches off those governments. So I think it's just finding that room for personal accountability. And no one should be able have, like you were talking about how like Alonzo can check your phone. Everyone should have someone who can go through someone's phone and see everything that's going on. So I think just kind of reiterating that point is,
and my wife was attending a training that her work was doing on recently on becoming more victim centered as a company, and she asked like, what is happening here for like for a Christian ministry. And she's like, so what are we doing to be trauma informed? And they talked about like services that are being provided to survivors of abuse. And my wife's follow-up question was, no, like not how are we making sure that victims are informed about trauma? If anything, they actually have a lot to teach us about trauma. How are we making sure that people who are just like our regular people in the pews are trauma informed and know how to handle when someone discloses to them? How do we make sure that our communities and our companies are more safer places for women and girls and all who are harmed by sexual abuse? And I don't know that there was a real clear answer on that. But that's what both she and I are hoping to do next post RZIM is like we need to, like, every one of us should be trauma informed. Every one of us should be like the number of girls who are sexually abused in the States is 1 of every 3 before they're 18. So if you factor in abuse that happens in university and beyond, the college and beyond, the numbers are higher. In Canada, we call college university. It's trippy. So like every one of us has sisters, moms, friends, as well as other guys in our life who are being sexually abused or have been sexually abused. Every one of us needs to go and find out how are we able to be advocates for them.
So how do we, because this is an important point, I think, and it's like, how do we listen well? Because it seems like just with like a lot of these allegations of like sexual abuse or assault or things like this, it's almost like people just don't know what to do. Like I'm thinking about, well, he may not be a Christian, like Deshaun Watson, the NFL football player right now. He's gone from 0 to like 15, 16 sexual assault / harassment lawsuits against him in the past like just week or so. And just like reading comments from what people are saying just in like my generation on social media, everyone's like, well, these people are just looking for fame. These women accusing, they're just looking for fame or money or things like that. And a lot of times when we hear these accusations against these big figures, that's just kind of like, at least for me, it's like almost the default is to just like be very skeptical of these things. Like I think it's a very cultural thing because not many people would really believe that 1/3 of women by the time of 18 have had to face some sort of like sexual harassment or assault. So like, how do we be the advocate that you're talking about here with situations like Ravi?
Yeah, so that's a really real question. We hear from a lot of people. One is we need to be informed. Like we hear that type of thing. I hear that quite a bit from my friends. As I even was saying, guys, like if you look at the evidence before the report came out, like look at the evidence. There's enough evidence online. You can see that Ravi has been that he's a predator, and people are like, oh no, like the people are just it's a way to have 15 minutes of fame. Dr. Diane Langberg is like a matriarch in the world of counseling and psychiatry and such. She's written the book Redeeming Power as well as Suffering in the Heart of God. Incredible books. And I saw a quote from her recently that talked that she has the stats that like only 3 to 9%, I believe off the top of my head, I think it was like 3 to 9% of disclosures or whatever the number was. I should be careful not to give a false number. It was a small percentage. And part of the reason why that she unpacks is it's a horrifically miserable thing to disclose sexual abuse. It is so vulnerable. It's so painful. So much of the time when it isn't believed. There's a lot of easy, like if someone is looking for fame, like they'll go make a TikTok. Like they're not going to go and like, it almost never happens. So yeah, just being informed, being a little bit educated on the stuff is profoundly helpful. There's a lot of good resources. So like, again, I'll go out on a limb and say, I don't believe the reason that RZIM offices around the world are shutting down. Canada has officially announced that it's closing down, and RZIM Atlanta is massively reducing in size. I don't believe any of that's happening because Ravi was a predator.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are other ministries who have been in a similar situation. L'Arche Canada was a huge, huge ministry that ministering to people with severe disabilities. And they went through a similar situation where their beloved, legendary founder was found to be a sexual predator just a year before the RZIM situation. And as far as I know, like, they're thriving. Donations are up. Their impact is bigger than ever. Like, they're huge because their leadership took a victim-centered approach from the beginning. I believe the reason so much of RZIM is evaporating is because not Ravi, but the leaders who had taken over from Ravi were making decisions that were so much more about PR than they were about victims and truth and transparency. There wasn't a call for victims until after the report was finished. There was a number of staff who were calling for a call for victims since September 29th. A lot of stuff like that. That's challenging one of my beloved leaders at RZIM, who I've had so much trust in, I've learned so much from, and was mishandling this stuff so hard. And I was just saying, like, hey, like, these decisions you're making are toxic. And he was like, well, like, hey, like, there's no seminary class on this. Like, there's no training for this. Yeah. And like, I've never dealt with this kind of crisis before. Like, my dad taught me as a kid, he would say, naivety is evil. It's harmful. And I was like, Dad, take a chill pill. You know, like, I'm from a homeschool family. Like, hey, we like to be hyped up about a lot of things, boycott everything. You know, like, Dad, like, you know, calm down. And he was like, no, Daniel, listen, naivety is evil. And going through the RZIM situation, like, the not knowing the reality, not knowing the dynamics of abuse and power and sexual statistics, like abuse statistics and all that, is no alibi. Like, these guys in leadership, these men and women in leadership in churches or ministries or companies, like, as soon as you're managing people who are at risk. Like, if someone has more than 3 women on their team, they're likely responsible for survivors of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
So go get informed, everybody. That's kind of rambling. I hope it made sense.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking with you, and I have maybe 1 or 2 questions here, and then we'll go to a little bit of live questions here to finish things out. But how do we help, like, I don't know if you're familiar with William Lane Craig's debate with Paul Draper on the existence of God. But one of the arguments that Paul Draper, who's an agnostic, gives against like theism is the idea of, like, the moral meager fruits of Christianity, where he says, like, people that say they're Christians and they're supposedly, like, following the true, perfect, all loving God, they turn out to just be like everyone else, and they have all these inadequate or just average moral fruits, or in the case of Ravi, people who claim to be Christians but do these horrific damaging things. This counts as just evidence against God. And like, if this Christianity stuff really had some legs to it, these people would actually be doing great things. But instead we see people like Ravi who just fail and fall short. So this religion must be false. So kind of trying to sum up an objection here to, like, Christianity from, like, a situation like Ravi's, but how would you respond to something along these lines?
Yeah, I mean, if the Christian message was like, Christians are the best, like, Christians are heroes, then I think that argument would hold a lot of water. But, like, the Christian worldview and message is just the opposite. It's like every one of us has a profound capacity for harm, toxicity, and deception. Deception that we peddle to others, and deception we even peddle to ourselves. And so when one looks at a situation like Ravi, like, it should not be surprising, heartbreaking, but not surprising to anybody familiar with the scriptures. Joe Vitelli has an incredible quote where she talks about, if you look at the just gross stories of the Bible, one of the reasons that they exist is to show us that God will not participate in a religious cover-up. That God is very honest about the depravity and brokenness and human capacity for evil. In fact, that's the reason Jesus decided that he'd enter into the brokenness of the world, is because he's so honest about our brokenness, and yet loves us nonetheless, in that his death not only washes away, or makes it possible to wash away, all the shame and the wrong that every one of us has done, but also washes away, heals the brokenness that is done by that harm, that as humans harm each other. Isaiah 53, ancient prophecy that about the Messiah, Jesus, says, by his stripes we are healed. And so in that I see that the blood of Jesus, addresses the harm we cause others and the harm that others have caused us. And so, I just, when we see a situation like Ravi's, I think the Bible both anticipates it, but also provides an honest solution to it. And I don't know that atheism or a lot of other worldviews do either, anticipating the depth of our depravity, provide a solution to the fullness of it.
Yeah, one interesting kind of like side here. I don't know if it's really a response to the argument I presented, but it's just kind of like, if atheism is true, Ravi really got away with what he did. Like, it's kind of the end, like he dies and that's it. Whereas like if we hold to Christianity being true, there's actually a judgment, and while he may have got away with it in this life, he's not going into the next.
Yeah.
So
on that, can I say another
yeah, feel free. Go ahead.
One of my colleagues, we had some of us got together with Diane Langberg on Zoom and just asked for advice about stuff, how we can be more victim centered and stuff like that. And Dr. Diane Langberg, so my colleague, my beloved friend, was like, yo, since all the allegations came to light, I'm just having so much trouble trusting people, especially leaders. And I think I've become cynical. And Dr. Diane Langberg goes, not nearly cynical enough. And she, what? She's like, you should be more cynical. Think about Jesus. He said, there's a line that says in the Bible, but Jesus did not entrust himself to anyone because he knows what is in man. And like Jesus is even more hard on the human capacity for wickedness and deception than even the most jaded of us in one sense. And yet still he yearns for our redemption and makes it possible. So I just, the Bible, seeing an example like Ravi in no way discredits the narrative of the Bible.
And I mean, it's really tough when you see hypocrites, but I always try to go back to, well, Christianity's truth doesn't really depend on does some person do something. It's just, did Jesus rise from the dead? But a question I have for you, Daniel, to kind of wrap things up, and then we'll go to some of these live questions here. If you're still listening, if you have more, feel free to add. We'll try to get through as many as we can. But where do we go from here? And it's hard because it's from person to person. We're all in different circumstances with different connections to the RZIM and just like these things in general. But like from your perspective, where do we go from here? We're a few, like a month from like when the report was released, and it was September when the allegations really came out a lot harder than they had in the past. Like, where do we go from here?
Define we.
Yeah, it's the issue I was thinking about as I was thinking about this question, but it's Christians maybe. Just like, what can Christians learn from this? Like the pastor, the person in the church, or just like, it's so broad because I said we. But like, how does Christians, do we move forward from this scandal?
Yeah, there's a few directions people might want to go in. One is with the death of Ravi, and then even more so the finding out the fraudulence of Ravi. I think can make a lot of us want to find the next Ravi, but like in what we thought Ravi was. It makes us hungry to find a new. And I find myself like I was as I was trying to process this stuff in October, November. I started reading a bunch of Paul David Tripp's books. They're so good. He has a book, Dangerous Calling and Lead, and a bunch of other Suffering, and just these wonderful books, Sex and Money. And I just like, and he's addressing so much of the reality of the stuff that Ravi did, and then ways that any of us can be like that, even if in a more limited capacity, and then how we can do things differently. And I just like loving, I felt like I was so safe in his books, and like they were so helpful. And I just started just hyping him up so hard to my wife, Alexandra. And she's just like, Daniel, you said that like the putting Ravi on a pedestal is a huge problem, and you're just doing it again. Tim Keller said the human heart is an idol factory. And I see that so much in me. Like I love just having heroes. And then so I think that where we can go from here is to make a fresh, like the next person to throw up on a pedestal. And it's just going to be harmful for them and harmful for us. So we need to not do that. There's a lot of headlines these days about celebrity culture at Hillsong and sex scandal there, and celebrity culture at RZIM. And there's just a lot of that stuff. I think we need to recapture Christianity that is much less about spotlights and celebrities, and so much more about doing life together, having real friendships, and because of our belovedness in Jesus, that we can be so real and so vulnerable with each other. You know, like I think we need more of that. So where we go from here, I think all of us need to take this moment to go and make sure every one of us is educated on the reality and of sexual abuse. Every one of us should go and do the research on how do we respond well to disclosure. Every one of us should go and do research on how to spot signs of abuse. And the many of us who are survivors of sexual abuse, I hope will hear in all of this that they are not alone, and that there's so many others within the church and in the world who have experienced similar things, and take comfort in seeing the way that someone like Lorianne Thompson has managed to find so much healing and freedom, and therefore follow that same path to reach out for help. I think where we go from here is that we learn to do friendship better. I think that where we go from here is to try to prioritize wholesomeness and discipleship and character over reputation and following and social media stuff.
Yeah, that's great. What we'll do now is we'll go to a little bit of questions. You have a chance to destroy Daniel because he said that nothing's off limits. But a question from Julian which says, for someone who's capable of gaining a large following, is there also a greater capacity to compartmentalize? You also talked about like speaking to a large crowd frequently a detriment to a person's character. So what are your thoughts here, Daniel, with regards to like someone like Ravi, who had such just a massive platform, like talking at like the Mormon church or whatever it's called, and just like speaking to these giant crowds? Like, what do you think about that and the character and stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that speaking to a large crowd is an incredibly lonely thing. Having a big following is lonely. People end up feeling like they know you. Often, many good speakers will pour a lot of their own stories and be vulnerable in that sense to the audience, and so it ends up creating a disproportional like ratio of knowledge. So if you had a friend and you just poured your heart out to them, and in normal friendship, someone reciprocates and gets vulnerable as well. If you confess shadow in your life, often your friend will say, "Hey, here's a way that I also relate." When you're a speaker, you'll pour your heart out, and the people might applaud, and it might be a buzz for a moment, but it's an incredibly lonely thing. And so I think that there's a lot of vulnerability in the worst sense of the word in speaking to a large crowd. Just isolated. When as an itinerant and you travel a lot, again, people feel like they know you because they maybe read your books and hear your voice and all that stuff, but they're strangers to you. And so I think it just makes it easier to, how do I say, among my friends, among Alonzo and Alexandra, like these are my wife and my best friend, like they always know how I'm really doing. And I might lie to myself. I'm a number 7 on the Enneagram. Like I love to be happy and spontaneous. And they're just like, "Daniel, like you're not doing okay." And I'm like, "No, I'm fine. You look exhausted." No, I'm fine. And I just can't fool them, even though I can fool myself. I can fool strangers some of the time. So that's to say, someone who's speaking to large crowds and traveling, it's just so much easier to wear masks and to compartmentalize.
Yeah, I appreciate that. A question here from Greg, which says, "Thanks for your story. Truth is so important. How are the folks at RZIM handling this? How are they dealing with the truth of what was preached versus the lie?" Man, this is a common theme that's kind of come up here. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Oh, Greg, rather. So I want to acknowledge I was with RZIM for such a brief time that, as devastating as it has all been, and it's been shattering for me, I believe it's probably a lot less horrific and nightmarish, as bad as it is, than it is for so many of my colleagues and friends. I don't think I understand how painful it is for a lot of my friends who are still there, and for some of them who haven't yet accepted that this is even true. I am concerned that The board at RZIM, like when you say how folks at RZIM, the board is still anonymous. They gave a beautiful apology except for their names. And then there's a lot of expectation on Lorianne to accept their apology. Never in my life have I heard of an apology that's anonymous, a meaningful apology that's anonymous. You can't look into the face of the person forgiving you and forgive them. You can't say, I forgive you, when you don't know who you is. And so I think there's still a ton of emptiness still in RZIM's response. I have friends who are still on staff there who were whistleblowers about this, who provided a ton of the evidence about what happened. They're part of the reason we know the truth. You can tell how sincere organization is about repentance on how they treat whistleblowers. And I know of, at least one of the most, if not the most significant whistleblower at RZIM is currently being ostracized, like hugely, administratively ostracized. That is all quite discouraging to me and upsetting. And at the same time, I do want to be, I don't want to be gracious to understand that like it is a lot more painful for the folks at RZIM to make decisions that are healthy decisions when they're experiencing a loss so much more painful than what I experienced.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you, Daniel. Just like seeing like your posts and such, you're speaking out for these people and trying like with like the board and such, really trying to like bring truth out there for people like Lorianne and others who are so hurt by this. So I appreciate you trying to get to the bottom of this journey that's obviously not over yet.
Yeah, I mean, Carson, Max, myself, we've all been really clear that like as we speak about this stuff, like we're speaking as all guys who have been part of the problem. We would love to be noble, heroic guys, but we're so far from that because like we've also been part of the problem at RZIM, that our speaking up is honestly like the least we could do. And so we're all on a journey to try to become more noble, more wholesome. But the stuff that we're tweeting or speaking up about is honestly minuscule. Yeah.
A few more questions here, Daniel. One from Jared, which says, in your opinion, how did this go on for so long without those who knew Ravi best not questioning him? There were some very obvious red flags. Yeah.
Jared, I agree with you. There was huge red flags. Again, a top person in the Canadian team took me aside in October, and just pulled me aside and said, Daniel, I know that you seem to think that this stuff is true, but whenever there's been abuse, there's always red flags, and there's no red flags. And that's just categorically false. Long before the September 29th Daniel Gilman article, there's emails that aren't disputed. Like that we all know that they're Ravi's emails where he was telling Lorianne Thompson not to disclose to her husband and that he might commit suicide if she does, and all this kind of stuff. As soon as a person in a pastoral or apologetic ministry is telling a woman not to be honest with her husband, like that's a huge red flag. And there was huge red flags about Ravi. So they were ignored. You're right, Jared. How did it go on so long? Well, in 2008, that is 12 years before 2020 when our piece came out. In 2008, a very senior person at RZIM Asia Pacific brought forward allegations about sexual misconduct about Ravi. And he brought it again in 2012. He, instead of opening up an investigation to look into Ravi, an investigation was opened up into whether or not he was spreading rumors and dissension at RZIM. And shortly after that, he was gone from the team. I know that, and the report mentions this in veiled details. As someone who was on staff, I know a few of the more particular details about. It mentions how a very senior person at RZIM had confronted Ravi about some stuff back in like more than 10 years before his death. And that gentleman ended up being ostracized by Ravi. I will say that person stayed on the team, continued to be one of Ravi's biggest cheerleaders. He fell into line and didn't bring it up again over the years. And eventually went on to have a ton of influence and a ton of influence on the team. It crushes me to think about what could have happened if that individual, instead of being one of the most significant and influential people in the flow chart at RZIM, if they would have stood their ground, the person that, I have to be, it's not all my story to share, but it would have made a huge difference, and tons of women would not have been harmed. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, this gets back to a universal thing, like not just an RZIM problem, but as I'm trying to understand this issue in the church in North America, what I'm discovering is there's a huge pattern that when it's a leader, a pastor, our favorite author or speaker who has done the abuse, we circle the wagons around them instead of circling the wagons around the victims. Mm. But the church has become way too often a vehicle for abuse instead of a haven for the abused. So sorry, I'm rambling. I'm so sorry.
No, you're all good, Daniel. It's an important question.
I think part of it goes back to how Jared. I think part of it goes back to why did I believe Ravi's narrative when there was holes in it? Is because I wanted to. Like I didn't want another one of my heroes to turn out to be a fraud, and so I willed myself to believe his narrative instead of taking the time to search out what the person who brought forward the allegations thought. Once I did hear her perspective, his narrative unraveled so quickly.
Leonardo had a comment here that I'm curious your thoughts on, which is says, Ravi's like every other man. He had a sin and his shortcomings. One thing we learned from Ravi is that what Jesus says, not everyone that calls me will get to heaven. And despite Ravi's flaws, it doesn't make what he preaches false. So how do you balance this where we have this sexual predator, but then also someone who preached the gospel?
Yeah, well, Leonardo, there's one part that I just want to I respect you. I appreciate your question. I take profound issue with the first part of what you said, that he is like every other man. He has sin and shortcomings. Leonardo, I find people talking about what Ravi did like as if it's there's a lot of comments, like 500 likes in RZIM's post about the report saying we're like we have to let no one throw a stone. We're all like Ravi. We all struggle with sin. This is not a matter simply of sin. This is not a matter simply of lust. This is a matter of criminal, predatory, sexual abuse, assault, and rape. And we need to be careful that we don't conflate a struggle with lust with predatory behavior. A struggle with lust is serious. We need to deal with that. We should not be objectifying anybody. It makes the world less safe. It's sinful. We need to look to God for forgiveness. We need to reach out for help to deal with it. I've had a lot of guys and some girls come forward and disclose, lustful behaviors and thought patterns. And I've been able to direct them toward professional help to deal with it. But one time I had someone come forward after I preached and disclose that he had sexually abused a child. I didn't treat it like I just normally would treat like a porn addiction. I helped him. I walked with him to the police station and he went to jail. That's how we're to treat sexual predators. That's how we're to treat that. And we have to refuse to conflate the two. Everyone struggles with lust, guys and girls, but not everybody sexually abuses people. And we should make sure it's as few people do as possible.
Mm-hmm. Probably the last
part. Doesn't make what he preaches false? Yes, but still, here's what I'd say. You're right. Just because it's a logical fallacy to say because someone themselves is corrupt that with a message that they use. If someone embraces a good message as a vehicle to deceive people, like it makes them a bad person, not their message. At the same time, like if Ravi had written an excellent math textbook, I probably would be less quick to throw it away because like those principles, the mathematics, like it is what it is and whatever. But the fact that Ravi's message, like one of his most famous messages that is in like everything so much of what he did is this. If the violation of a human being is really evil, like if the category of evil is real, then so there must be a category of good. If good and evil are real categories, there must be a moral law that differentiates the two. If there's a moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver. Therefore, there must be this being outside of matter. There must be a God. Okay, like that's woven through all the stuff. It's this argument for God from the sacredness of human life. Well, the fact that he himself was violating human beings the dignity of human beings and the sacredness of life. It makes his own words on it so hollow. And there's others who say the same thing. We should sell their books instead, and we should delete his content.
Mm-hmm. It's so good, and I'm so glad that RZIM is deleting all of Ravi's content. It's a start. Julian, probably our last question says, what would you suggest to assist in the recovery for someone who confesses to sexual abuse? You're just talking about this, but do you have any kind of like other thoughts on this question?
Yeah, sure. Well, Julian, thanks for the question. Yeah, it's maybe the most important question. I think that we can too much focus on how not to be a Ravi instead of thinking about like, how can we care for those who have been victims, like Ravi's victims. And so it's a beautiful question. I think that my quickest answer would be that I would encourage people who have, oh wait, would you say for someone who confesses to sexual abuse? So we're sorry, not talking about victims, we're talking about someone.
Yeah.
Okay, different. Okay, for what I was gonna say though, for anyone who discloses that they've been abused, I encourage them to reach out for professional help. We make a mistake when people ordained like myself think that because we have some seminary training and we're ordained, that we're pastors or whatever, that we can just handle it ourselves. If you had a broken arm, you wouldn't go to your friend who watched the YouTube do-it-yourself video. Like, you would go to professionals. And where there's been sexual trauma, assault, and abuse, often it's actually more, we can be more profoundly harmed than just a broken arm. Like, it's more intricate to help repair us where our mind and our heart and our being has felt so violated. And so I just encourage people to reach out for professional help, people who are trained at restoring. But the question is, how do we help someone who has confessed sexual abuse? First, can I answer the question before that question in a sense, which is,
do whatever you want. Yeah.
How can we create contexts where people will confess sexual abuse? In the experience that I've had where this has happened, I was preaching on Colossians chapter 3, where Paul talks about putting sin to death. And so in that sermon, I was being very serious, like Paul is, about how serious it is for us to have to put our sins to death. That everything the Bible calls sin is never only like harming ourselves, it's always harming someone else as well. And we need to take that very seriously and be like the word Paul uses to put sin to death is aggressive, ongoing, violent language. We have to be so intentional about addressing and turning from the toxic behaviors in our lives. So I was talking about that in that same passage, that same part of the letter from Paul in Colossians 3. He says, as God's holy and beloved, and continues. And this is to the very people who he's saying, put your sin to death. And so in that sermon, I was saying, guys, listen, like, you might find yourself doing things that you promised yourself you would never do, that you never even conceived of yourself as ever being possible. And yet you don't even recognize yourself anymore because of the horrific stuff you've done. Know that in Christ, you are holy and beloved. Holy, it means set apart for noble use. Like, every one of us was called and created for noble purpose. And beloved, it's more than just love. It means liked, delighted in, that you are so special to God. He loves you even before you've had a chance to put down Colossians 3, put down the letter and get to work putting sin to death. And so it was at the end of that message that this man came up to me and disclosed to me what he had done. And he shared with me how it was, as he realized, like, I have to be serious about the horrific stuff I've done. And I think this guy welcomes me. Like, I think he sees me as valuable. So he came up to me and he disclosed that he had sexually abused a little boy with severe disabilities. I apologize to anyone who this is like profoundly disturbing and triggering for. Yeah, he confessed to me. He said, what do I need to know? And not everyone would be in a place to do this, but I hugged him and I held him. And I said, you are holy and beloved, and you need to go to jail. And I said, like, yeah, I talked with him about how people who sexually abuse people, in almost every single case, will go on to sexually abuse other people. And I said, hey, like, you need to make sure for all the other people you might harm that you don't harm them you need to get professional help. You need to disclose what you've done. God is a God of love. He's a God of justice. That means this kid is only going to get like help and a sense of closure if you come forward and justice is served. You need to go to jail. At the court, when the trial happened a year later, and he was sentenced to jail, the judge actually said this person would never have been caught had he not come forward when asked why he did such a thing, and then just started sharing the gospel through his words. The defendant said, and talked about the gospel and Jesus and all this stuff. That's all to say. When we come forward with whatever our toxic behaviors are, sexual abuse, anger problems, criminal stuff, just sinful stuff, whenever we come forward and disclose, that's part of our noble purpose, because it helps us become more healthy and safeguards others and provides a sense of justice for people we've hurt. Like, it's a noble thing. And every one of us is created for this noble purpose. We're created to be light in the darkness, to borrow John's words about Jesus. So I want to encourage everyone, including myself, with wherever our shadows are, wherever our sin is in criminal behavior, if we have criminal behavior, we need to come forward like this young man. So I think that as human beings, and I'm trying to learn, I'm not there yet. I've been pretty harsh with my Twitter, talking about the RZIM matters and this, but I want all of us to be in our speaking about these things, to be speaking about it in a way that takes the matter seriously, is not being light about the criminal behavior, but at the same time is creating an environment that welcomes those who've abused, those who've harmed. So I hope that helps answer your question, Julian. Yeah. Sorry for being so rambly.
No, you're good, because these are such like deep questions, so it's hard to like just kind of like say like a 1 minute bit and be done with it. Do you have time for one more question, Daniel?
Sure.
Awesome. A question from Swift C, which says, can someone like what Ravi did still be redeemed by Christ?
For sure. An example I think of is another, like someone who did just horrific, harmful behavior, violating human beings, is John Newton. He was a slave driver. He was a slave trader, not a slave driver. He was a slave trader. He was a horrific human being. He confessed, he came clean, and he went on to become one of England's and the world's greatest advocates against the slave trade. Super helpful to the cause of abolishing the slave trade, and wrote the song Amazing Grace, which is part of his own confession. It's definitely possible that anyone can be redeemed. At the same time, like David also did horrible things, but Ravi is not like David. David, when he was confronted with his criminal behavior, confessed it, brought it into the light, and accepted the penalty and the punishment for what he did. And there was beautiful redemption in that, and restoration. Saul was a man like David, like Ravi, did terrible things. Maybe less terrible than David, actually. But Saul refused, when he was confronted, he refused to really be honest. He tried to deflect it and all that. And God canceled Saul. And there's no redemption in Saul's story, really. If Ravi repented, if he confessed, then he is more like David. But as far as we know, he refused to, and he harmed women in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. It took it to his death. There's not a lot of, we need to, someone once said regarding the two criminals that were crucified beside Jesus, where like both had done criminal behavior, and one of them gets redeemed and one of them does not. And someone said, one criminal was redeemed that none might despair, but only one criminal was redeemed that none might presume. And we need to take it very serious. It's a scary thing to disclose our sin, our shadow, our toxicity, and our criminal behavior. But we need to, if we desire redemption. Just one last on this, if I may preach for a second. Saul, when he's confronted by a friend, his response, he's confronted by Samuel, and he says, Samuel, like, come with me. Like, don't leave me, basically. In Samuel, he found validation for his call, his kingship. David, when he's confronted with his sin and his criminal behavior, writes Psalm 51, a confession where he says in it, like, God, don't take your presence from me. Don't take your spirit from me. Look what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, don't take my call from me. Don't take my reputation from me. He's kind of saying, like, you can have it. You can take away my crown. You can take away my throne. You can take away my kingship. Take my reputation. Here's who I really am. I've done all this. Like, he wrote that confession for the choir to sing. He was bringing it all into the light. And this is challenging to me because we need to be people who are not in love with our call, not in love with our job, but that we're in love with the one who called us, with Jesus. And that, when I don't feel like bringing my shadow, my sin, my stuff into the light, that compels me to, I want to be like David. I don't want to be like Saul. I want to be like David. I don't want to be like Ravi. I want to be cultivating a love for Jesus that compels me into the light.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your time and for reaching out. I'm so glad that we had this conversation, and hopefully it helps someone out there listening. Do you have any kind of like last thoughts or things you want to share that you didn't get off your chest before we start to wrap things up?
I got a lot off my chest. Thanks, Zach. Zach, thank you so much. You've introduced me to so many apologists through your March Madness tournament. And, yeah, thanks for even including me in it. I was surprised when you did, because I'm just a young buck. But yeah, those other names, broadening the scope of the guys that I'm reading and learning from, and girls that I'm learning and reading from, I didn't realize would be instrumental to my being able to find the helps that I needed in light of all the Ravi situations. So you've ministered to me through your own ministry, through Twitter, and I'm just so grateful to get to meet you in person tonight.
More or less in person, virtual. You're stuck over there in Canada. I'm stuck in Virginia, but I'm so glad that it helped you a little bit, and it amazed me with just how many men and women there are faithfully serving Christ all over the world. So, Daniel, thank you so much for your time, and I thank you everyone for tuning in. If you want to follow Daniel, there's a link down below. And just thank you everyone who tuned in, and have a good one, and God bless. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.